Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. As Ukraine steps up strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, including the Druzhba pipeline that feeds Hungary and Slovakia, tensions between Kyiv and Budapest are again in the spotlight. Hungary, heavily reliant on Russian oil, has condemned the attacks, raising questions about EU cohesion, regional energy security, and political alliances. Joining us today on TVP World to unpack the fallout is Daniel Hegedüs, Regional Director of Transatlantic Trust Council Central Europe, a leading voice on Central European foreign policy. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
So, can you help us unpack what are some of the strategic consequences of Ukraine targeting this pipeline that's for countries like Hungary and Slovakia?
Thank you. Potentially, I would start underlining what you already mentioned, that these are not isolated cases. Aside of the three attacks against the Druzhba infrastructure over the past couple of weeks, Ukraine conducted systemic attacks against the totality of Russian energy infrastructure. That included almost all of the largest oil refineries of Russia on European soil. The refinery in Ryazan, Krasnodar, Saratov. It included actually one of the largest maritime export hub on the Baltic Sea side, Ust-Luga. And two out of the three attacks against the Druzhba pipeline system happened in Uniecha, which is a hub that actually connects the Baltic Sea pipeline system with Druzhba. So the attacks were not necessarily deliberate against the energy supply to Hungary and Slovakia, but mostly also targeted to undercut the supply to the Nordic Baltic Sea side from where the maritime export happens. And against that fact, I think it's fair to say that it was not the strategic objective of Ukraine to undercut the energy security of Hungary and Slovakia. It was rather a collateral damage. It was not unintentional, but it was not the main strategic objective behind the Ukrainian behavior.
All right. So what does this energy disruption compound long-standing friction between Kyiv and Budapest? Do you think that this might actually widen the rift between the two countries?
It's certainly widening the rift between the two countries, and I think it can be seen as very desperate moves on both sides. Obviously, it won't happen to get Hungarian support to start the EU accession negotiations with Ukraine in the September EU Council meeting. But I think the Ukrainian side came actually to the conclusion that they can't expect any positive behavior from Budapest, which is using Ukraine as a scapegoat and actually as a concept of public enemy in the election campaign up to the 2026 Hungarian elections. And with this conclusion that they can't expect anything possible, they are not holding themselves back from attacks against the Russian energy infrastructure that can have actually also negative consequences for Hungary. It is also important to underline that actually the main reason why Hungary and Slovakia are actually dependent on this Russian import is that they very deliberately failed to diversify their crude oil supply over the past 3 years. Hungary has alternative supply routes, namely the Adria crude oil pipeline through Croatia, which is currently running on approximately 15% of capacity. So actually, the fallout on Druzhba is not really threatening the supply security because there are alternative routes. The main reason why Hungary is sticking to Russian oil import is very simple. The Ural crude oil is traded significantly cheaper than Brent on the world markets, and it offers significant financial benefits for the Russian energy company MOL, which is also the owner of Slovakia's main energy company, Slovnaft.
Now, back when Zelensky and EU leaders went to Washington, D.C. and met with the Trump administration, reportedly there was a call from Trump to Orban questioning why he's been blocking Ukraine's EU accession and sort of put him in between a rock and a very hard place back then. Do you think that this will give Hungary the justification they need to continue to block Ukraine's path to the European Union?
It was certainly a very disappointing development from the perspective of Hungarian Prime Minister Orban, especially against the background because it made clear that the United States is supportive towards the EU accession of Ukraine for the very simple reason because they see the EU membership or the potential future EU membership of Ukraine as a sort of security guarantee for Kyiv. Notwithstanding this, I don't think that it will cause Prime Minister Orban backtracking from his current both foreign and domestic policy course. First, it would be a huge loss of face in the domestic political arena, where Fidesz is trailing behind the main opposition party, Respect and Freedom, in all of the polls. And as I mentioned, Fidesz political campaign is very much focused on accusing Ukraine as the main reason of the economic difficulties of the country. Second, Donald Trump does not necessarily have the main leverage over Prime Minister Orban to enact or to press the Hungarian government for such a significant change in behavior. And honestly, I also don't think that it would be really a strategic issue for the current US administration. It's practically a trap for both the Ukrainian and the Hungarian side. For Ukraine, it is also very, very dangerous because Hungary is a main export source of electricity towards Ukraine, while actually almost 15% of diesel fuel consumed by Ukrainian economy and also armed forces is coming from Slovakia. So it's practically a deadlock between the conflicting parties without any clear pathway out of this deadlock in the foreseeable future.
Right, you brought up something very important that is very seldomly mentioned, that Ukraine does rely to some extent from the electricity coming from Hungary as well as diesel fuel from Slovakia. Do you think that this diplomatic fallout would be a bit more substantial with those kind of factors in mind?
That was the reason why I mentioned that these moves are pretty desperate from both sides. I don't really expect Hungary cutting down actually the electricity import, primarily because it's not a state matter. The grid operators are private companies and actually operate on the basis of market demand. Hungary is not only an exporter of electricity to Ukraine, but also an importer dependent on the load of the grid. It's a matter of fact that actually the raw material to the Slovakian diesel export to Ukraine is stemming from the Russian crude oil. Surprisingly, Slovakia was very diplomatic in this matter and doesn't directly threaten actually Ukraine with the suspension of the fuel export to the country. We have been seeing actually in the past that Slovakia used to be much more flexible in this conflict than Hungary vis-a-vis Ukraine, and in that regard expect in some way a compromise between the two countries. Even in the past, there have been days when, due to Ukrainian attacks, supply over Druzhba has been suspended. I can imagine that the attacks won't continue in this systemic manner, then they happened over August. And actually, this period will be just a reminder for the Hungarian and the Slovak government on the part of Ukraine that it's time to diversify, because that vulnerability will remain, and such attacks can occur even in the future against this part of the Russian energy infrastructure.
Right, like you mentioned, reliance on Russian energy without diversification put everyone at risk. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.